Hey there. So, as I'm working episode by episode through season one of Star Trek Picard, definitely my favorite season by far. But for this video, I'll be talking about episode 7, Nepenthe, the Planet of Refuge episode, where we explore Soji's post-traumatic psychology. And in the B plot, meanwhile, we get to watch Girardi's terrors, her internal terrors on board the La Serena, which we can't really call her post-traumatic experience because she's still in the trauma. And then throughout, not only are we seeing the psychology of these characters, but also it's kind of about the concept of empathy and about other people who are trying to read the sufferers, but they never do it quite perfectly. In Girardi's case, her agony is plain to see on her face, but no one comes even close to understanding what's actually going on inside her, cognitively and causally. Meanwhile, everyone on the planet Nepenthe is trying their best to figure each other out, showing a mostly an encouraging vision of empathy. What we get to see is mostly this really encouraging, really invigorating picture of people practicing empathy and practicing understanding. All right, so just to make a generalization, rewatching this episode as I watched it just to prepare to write this video, this time watching it, the episode just totally blew me away. I knew beforehand that this was one of those excellent episodes that I loved from the first time I saw it, but I guess I had forgot just how great it really is. And I think that at this point I'm prepared to make the generalization that this is what this may be. I'm really bad at making dogmatic generalizations. This may be my favorite episode in the season. There's just really a tremendous emotional payoff for everything that was building up in the preceding episodes. Everything in this episode feels extremely real. And the whole episode is filled to the brim with memorable moments and perceptive lines and little tidbits and impactful character shots that they let you see. The episode contains, I think, some of the most compelling and skilled acting that I've seen really anywhere at this point within Star Trek or anywhere else. And of course, part of that impression also goes back to the way the writing and directing work with the acting. So, you could say a lot of those different aspects come together to make you really feel the agonizing struggles of Daj and Girardi and the really unique dynamics of the very particular psychological experience they're going through. But then not only do you feel that, but also you feel this palpable warmth of this home environment, this family environment that our team finds on Nepenthe. Kind of like my feelings about episode 1. I really feel like I could do a 10-part series discussing this episode without running out of compelling things to say, compelling little things to draw attention to draw out and notice and say, wow, look at this, Now, speaking of episode 1, I think this is also a perfect time to say again something I said back then when I talked about episode 1, that really Picard season 1 at its core, more than anything, is an emotionally intense human interest story with an emphasis on psychology and character exploration, which is why I think this episode serves as, in the way I see it, serves as one of the most powerful episodes in the season, but not as a standalone, because it never could have any of that power without all the buildup that preceded it. All right, so on to, how about some memorable moments? There's the one juicy tomato and real is better, and that look of emptiness creeps over her face. Wow. Or how about that emotionally perfect, home-like, perfect dinner table, and somebody saying, "And what did you find out?" Which are words really for panic, and words that are kind of evil, because you can almost see Narek's malicious greed staring out through Picard's eyes. As those innocent words, such a powerful moment. Soji's dilemma in some of those parts, it's especially realistic considering the fact that in the Star Trek universe, the idea of some great manipulation that blurs the distinction between truth and illusion, that's even more plausible in the Star Trek universe. Think, for example, about holodecks, or better yet, think about the episode Future Imperfect and all those Romulans that were surrounding Riker, aka really just one harmless little lonely alien who created a giant illusion. Kind of funny also for that scene around the dinner table. Just for one kind of amusing off-center comment, I couldn't help but smile when Picard tells Soji in the list of things he says to notice with her superhuman senses, notice and to tell that she can trust him. He commented on the notice the dilation of my pupils to tell how honest I am, which I find just a little amusing since the show has included so many close-ups on what seems to me at my level of understanding to be visibly inappropriate pupil dilation for the context. I guess one of the downsides of having really good camera work with good, powerful close-ups of great actors is that there are some things that you can't really fake the way a good actor can fake a lot of things. Really, I think somebody wants to learn about human nonverbals and the way we function as humans. You can really learn a lot of that by watching good actors or by watching good TV, good movies. But pupil dilation wouldn't be one of those things. And just for a little fun of a little bit of Trek cross-referencing on the topic as well. Pupil dilation was cited in Voyager in the episode Unimatrix Zero as a big part of how the Doctor knew that Seven of Nine had some complicated romantic feelings for Axum. Over the last year or two, I've been trying to build my interpersonal awareness skills by paying attention to pupil dilation a little more. Generally speaking, TV and movie actors, as far as pupil dilation, it's kind of hit or miss as far as that goes, in terms of whether, at least from my observation of the difference between real life and TV, of whether it seems to be accurate or even close. And I'm assuming the reason for that is because it's one of those things that's just very, very difficult to fake. If you're new to the topic, here are some scattered clips, just some notes that I made a couple weeks ago when I was doing some Google searches on the topic. These are mostly from various academic articles and websites, academic websites that I found via Google a couple months ago, just trying to get a clearer picture for myself as I'm trying to clarify what kinds of things can or can't, should or shouldn't be read into that kind of thing. And some of these are direct quotes, some are paraphrases from when I put it into my notes. So here's one, I think this was from like the abstract of some article or something. Pupil dilation is an autonomic sympathetic nervous system response that can provide indices or indexes of attention, interest, or emotion, and is correlated with mental workload and arousal. So then some things that very enlarged pupils may imply fear, anxiety, mental strain, or task difficulty. Could also imply interest, engagement, or excitement. As I did some more reading, I listed mental effort, or dilated pupils that suddenly shrink can be taken to indicate relief, such as finishing a difficult task. In that moment, you might see that shrinking happen. Or it may even indicate, some studies showed that it could really indicate the moment when somebody has an idea that may end up solving the problem. So they're working on something really difficult, and then they have an idea, and their pupils just kind of shrink down. Dilated pupils may be correlated with working on a difficult task because of frustration and or effort, and it's definitely highly correlated with emotional arousal. And it is also associated with hearing emotion-related vocalizations. This was one interesting little summary of a study that I read. Emotion-related vocalizations, such as a cry for help, a scream, baby crying, that kind of thing. And those very predictably caused pupil dilation. And some studies suggested that it may actually be more connected with the brain's process of decoding the vocalization and figuring out what kind of scream is this, rather than necessarily reflecting the person's actual emotional reaction, like, oh, this is a desperate situation. And then as well, pupils that are less dilated than would be expected could be a correlation with such factors as fatigue and depression. So this is just kind of my little collection of notes that I threw together for a quick reference for myself as I'm thinking about pupil dilation. And so pupil dilation is kind of like micro expressions in the sense that people aren't in control of it in any simplistic sense, the way you're in control of your little limbs, for example. But where it's different from micro expressions is that it can be triggered by a whole wide range of factors. So, for example, pupil dilation alone wouldn't have told the doctor that Seven of Nine was romantically interested in Axum. Could just be that she finds him really confusing and emotionally distressing. So whenever he's in the room, she enters into a high arousal problem-solving mode. It takes a lot of, energy, concentration, whatever, Similarly, in this dinner table situation, Picard's, I'm assuming that when he says, look at my pupil dilation, I'm assuming what he means is that he'd be in a non-dilated state because he's at ease instead of trying to, outwit and manipulate her. But you could suggest his lack of pupil dilation in that room could also be a clue that he's really relaxed in the evening and not trying to outwit Soji in the moment. But it could also indicate that he's at ease because he doesn't have much to lose, Could just be that he's exhausted from spending all day secretly arguing with Romulan operatives over a telepathic Zoom call, So you get a picture. Pupil dilation is something that is helpful to be aware of, but can only be interpreted within the greater context of a psychologically savvy understanding of the whole personality, background, situation, experiences that are involved. But it's just kind of ironic because in a TV or a movie, I think my personal conclusion at this point, trying to observe, of course, I'm an amateur, but my personal conclusion is I think when you see pupil dilation or lack of dilation on the screen, what you're really seeing, what I'm assuming is what you're really seeing is the actor and what he's experiencing in the moment, because a lot of the time it's just really, really off the mark. And I'm assuming, if somebody's pupils on a TV show are really, really big, it's probably because maybe this is the first take and they're kind of nervous, and if they're really contracted, maybe in the maybe in the scene they just found out that somebody they know died, but they're in this really kind of calm, gentle, maybe an intimate kind of context. So the actor is completely at ease, and he or she is enjoying putting on this emotional show in a relaxed state. But the character being portrayed is supposed to be suddenly his mind is racing and he's, but the pupils are these tiny little relaxed, the world is wonderful, So that's kind of my take on the whole pupil dilation thing. Enough on that sidetrack. Let's actually talk about the episode in question. Let's actually rewind to the beginning of the episode for a minute. That opening scene where O mind melds with Jurati. It does remind me of Tuvok mind melding with that one character in and I forgot to write down the name of the episode. The episode Random Thoughts, which I also mentioned in my video on Stardust City Rag. But anyway, so the difference really is that O's motivation is manipulation, obviously, but it's kind of ironic because just like Tuvok, she's using true information to deceitfully manipulate. In other words, she's just using her actual memories. It's not like she's producing some kind of illusion or something. So this true content that she shares in a manipulative manner serves to sabotage Jurati's ability to think clearly, her ability to use reason or to make any kind of conscious choice in the matter. There's also something intriguing about seeing the power here when all of O's inner maelstrom is just dumped onto Jurati. But O, as you watch her face, she just remains completely calm in that centered Vulcan way. Because all of that maelstrom exists continually and mundanely within O, but under control. While I was watching her dignified, stoic face in that scene, I thought about how Star Trek has this combination, throughout the series, this combination of certain neurotic Vulcans, as I would see it, who pretend to be emotionless, and they're always neurotically trying to suppress their emotions and keep them down. T'Pol is a great example of that throughout the entire series of Enterprise. As well as, on the other hand, these truly centered, calm Vulcans like Tuvok, who are calm, but also they're also perceptive and open to their own internal observations and things like that. And I would say one of the pictures of that is when you think about Tuvok becoming one of Janeway's most prized advisors. Anyway, clearly O is the latter. Much like Tuvok, she's accustomed to the maelstrom. She's completely in control rather than living in denial or living with internal avoidance. So that while she's externally completely at peace, you would think that her everything inside her mind is just wonderful roses and daisies, but just a touch from the ocean of the nightmares in her mind, just a touch of that is enough to tear Jurati to pieces. And to complete that range of Vulcan mental health stuff, think about the original series, Spock. I put him somewhere in the middle between, the neurotic version and the, really balanced, open version. Because Spock is clearly not quite as unaffected as he would like others to think. He's clearly not living out of a mindset of healthy inner openness. In contrast to this, in Voyager, Tuvok admitted to Neelix in that one episode when he was like an emotional reboot, so he was like, all emotionally expressive. But he admitted to Neelix in that moment that when he's his normal Vulcan self, he still has feelings, he just doesn't express them. So that would seem to suggest would seem to point us toward a more acceptance approach to emotion for healthy Vulcans, which is definitely closer to what works in real life, rather than the kind of suppression approach where you just push down those emotions, which definitely, that suppression approach is definitely something that's described more often in episodes about Vulcans. So definitely you get, implications of both. There's clearly a lot of violent suppression of his emotions that Tuvok shows, particularly whenever he starts to lose control. He just kind of goes, like he's trying to push down those emotions. But in other episodes, I think they do things that imply a more realistic, more human kind of control, such as a human could gain, which you would get to by exercising an internal openness and internal emotional acceptance, allowing yourself to experience emotions and notice your emotions and experience them while choosing to move toward values-based behavior, as suggested by ACT therapy. That sentence was just me vomiting up ACT therapy. And really, for human cultures and traditions, the idea of building inner peace by exploring your inner experience rather than strangling it out or running from it or trying to suppress it violently. It really plays an important role in many human traditions, such as Greek Stoicism, which doesn't mean you be a Stoic by never showing any emotions. That's not Greek Stoicism. It's more like similar to ACT therapy in some ways, just a balanced way of accepting your emotions. And I don't know the details about it because I haven't studied it lately, but anyway, so in the Greek Stoic approach, Christian existential thinking, Buddhist philosophy, etc. Enough on that tangent. Let's get back to our episode. So wherever Commodore O gets her emotional centeredness, she has clearly taken the time to face and accept her inner experience of distress over all these traumatic impulses and imagery, so that she has come to where now she has gradually come to be adapted to the presence of these images in her mind. Much like Tuvok with all of his traumatic, terrifying images that when he unloaded them onto that guy was like, he's completely ruined. And you could also say Narissa. She also has apparently done the same thing. She has come to face and to gradually come to peace with, come to accept, come to become used to these traumatic images. And seeing those three people, they've all done the same thing in their mental health. You've got Tuvok, our hero from Voyager, and you've got Narissa, who in this episode is just really a monster. And that kind of reminds me of the fact that emotional centeredness, or to use the word spirituality in the most vague sense of the word, of referring to someone's inner sense of wholeness, someone's self-actualization, that kind of thing. But those categories, it doesn't actually have any necessary bearing on somebody's morality or the right and wrong choices they'll make, or whether you're a good person, There'd be a separate concept, and the separate concept of somebody's morality and their decisions and what kind of person they choose to be. You could also use the word spirituality for that, but that would be a different sense of the word depending on how the person is using the word. So for Vulcans, for example, how self-actualized or how psychiatrically whole the person is would be a completely different issue from, on the other hand, let's say, how much allegiance the person has to the teachings of Surak with all the moral dimensions. Or if there is such a thing, maybe you could say how mystically connected the person is to the intangible source of Sirach's teachings. However you want to put it. Those are the kind of the two different ways of thinking of the word spiritual or spirituality. So Narissa is very emotionally healthy in terms of being resistant to mental breakdown from trauma, being able to maintain consistent and predictable emotional states, etc. But her belief system and her moral habits, etc., lead to the fact that she denigrates the lives of individuals. And she's willing to not just murder Soji while calling her the robot girl, she's also willing to mow down XBs in cold blood and then cold-heartedly blame it on the good-hearted philanthropist who was trying to help them grow. Cute. Also, it's interesting in this scene how Narissa's comment to Hugh about the deaths of the XBs suggests kind of that Narissa and Narek are kind of made out of the same cloth, because she does to Hugh exactly what Narek did to Soji. The difference there is that Hugh isn't as emotionally vulnerable as Soji. But basically what it is in a highly traumatic moment, remember Hugh was just kind of weeping and shaking uncontrollably. In that emotionally traumatic moment of vulnerability, she lays this obscene lie onto her victim, which in the intensity and traumatic weight of the moment, that lie is going to hold a crippling plausibility to that victim, a kind of plausibility that can't be easily, just kind of shrugged off. When she says basically, these people died because of the wrong choice that you made. It's all on you, something to that effect. I'll look up the direct quote and put it in text because I didn't write it down at this point. So that kind of way of playing with people, I figure it's probably either a skill that they both were taught, Narek and Narissa, or more likely they learned it by experience in some kind of toxic upbringing, or probably both happened. Anyway, to get back to the main thread of the episode, I absolutely love seeing the Riker family at this point in the story, and the way the writers / the production team and the way they employed that at this role in the story. I think it's a great choice by the production team, partly because if you think about it, seeing Riker and Troy is going to trigger nostalgia in the viewer, and a big part of or at least for those who grew up with Star Trek to any degree. And a big part of the emotional tone and the symbolism of that part of the episode is the warmth and the safety of this familiar, trusted family kind of context in the midst of the greater context of the fear and all the trauma and everything. So Picard's impulse and his feelings at this point, basically, his impulse to reach out to people he will feel safe and connected with, that whole thing, it kind of has the potential to be shared in the audience, who were, those audience members who are Trekkies or grew up with Star Trek. So it's kind of like the scene feels natural because the emotions and feelings that Picard is showing, and the feeling of long lost family and all that, is one that actually is probably gonna, for a lot of the audience, is gonna feel real to them, because Riker feels to them like he's their distant family member that they haven't seen for a couple of decades. At least that's kind of the emotional effect that it did for me. And I think that was intentional. I think it was really well done. Now, on the concept that Picard would go to Nepenthe, that he made the choice since they were on a remote planet that's out in the middle of nowhere. And that Picard would intuitively think to leap to that location. I think it's interesting to note on that topic that it has been observed by psychologists that there are kind of two standard responses to chronic stress: the fight or flight, which is often thought of as a stereotypically male response, and the tend and befriend, which is often thought of as a stereotypically female response. And you can kind of simplistically put them into male or female, but the fact is that we both need to have some amount of reliance on both. And in this case, I think Picard intuitively moved toward people he trusts the most and has the warmest feelings toward in that moment of crisis, rather than merely following, let's say, following his Starfleet training and trying to find where's the best kind of fortress we can find, something like that. I think it's important for all of us to recognize, whether you're male or female, to recognize that moments of crisis aren't just a time to put down your feet in it and get all your rocket fuel out like a big old tank, and charge the enemy, like the good old independent man or the independent woman you are, kind of the stereotypical fight or flight response. Moments of crisis are also a time to reach out to others and to build that into a habit where you feel that you feel the crisis, you feel the stress, you feel the desperation, and you move toward that intuitively, which can be a habit that you build the habit of reaching out rather than trying to stand alone. By becoming more connected rather than less, you not only open yourself up to a lot of healthy coping mechanisms that become available to you, but you also strengthen the kinds of social networks that will be priceless, not only to those people that you love, but also to yourself. And I think that this version of Picard with a much more developed set of relational kinds of intuitions, he's become a much more relational person. I think this older version of Picard, who has grown into a much more emotionally integrated person, I think he just instinctively and intuitionally leans toward the tend and befriend side of things, because over time he's learned by experience how priceless that can be. And probably also because he's learned by experience the mistake of moving toward isolation when things get tough. When you go into that, crisis mode, and you move toward isolation, you learn by experience what happens when, for example, you find yourself in a place where Raffi and Clancy and others just hate your guts because when things got tough, you just abandoned everybody and ran off to be alone. So it seems that Picard has this new, very healthy impulse of moving toward tend and befriend when in the moment of crisis. In that moment when you don't have time to think, you just kind of do what comes to you. I think that's what causes him to type in Nepenthe and then set up what kind of history scrambler he might have set in there to keep them from following him. But and a part of that is because as soon as he gets there, he demonstrates that he really knows. He knows better than to put Riker and the family in danger. And the moment he shows up, he tells them he knows better and he's getting ready to leave as soon as possible. And that suggests that what he did was a very impulse-driven kind of thing. Now, back to the whole kind of nostalgia / family symbolism kind of thing. If you think of Riker and Troy as kind of these familiar family members from the watchers, the audience's childhood, I think you could think about Kestra similarly as taking a bit of a symbolic role of representing the childhood self, maybe, of adult watchers who grew up watching The Next Generation. Or perhaps similarly, you could maybe instead think of her as representing the kids of such adults. Kids maybe who even heard their parents talk about, let's say, Data, just like with Kestra, who grew up hearing conversations about Data. If you think about it, Kestra is kind of like, maybe I'm stretching it a bit here, but when I look at her, I kind of think of, it's kind of like a little Trekkie or a kid of a Trekkie. She's sheltered, she's intelligent, she's a kind of slightly nerdy 12-year-old who thinks that Data is super cool. Only thing is, she's not this socially awkward, emotionally stunted, stereotypical Trekkie kid, but none of us wants to accept that that stereotype has anything to it at all anyway, so we'll just not go there. And we all thought that Data was cool. Like Spock and like Tuvok, he's the kind of hero that any kid would admire. At least I sure did when I was that age. No coincidence, even that The Next Generation even made an episode about that. It was called Hero Worship, because it just makes so much sense for kids to geek out over how cool Data is. This episode also kind of really, actually, completely redeems the Troy character for me. This last time, as I went through The Next Generation from the beginning, I really felt in early Next Generation, one of the most poorly handled and really cringe-worthy characters in the whole series was Troy. And that goes on, stretching on painfully throughout the whole first 4 seasons. But her presentation here really just completely redeems her to me as a compelling and believable character who I can get behind. Now, to be fair, her appearances in the Next Generation films, and especially in Voyager, were already a vast improvement. But here in this episode, she is just completely plausible, believable, relatable, and deeply human. Or, pardon me, humanoid. She's a betazoid. And the way they portray her, or the way the actress portrays her, rather than using her betazoid power as some kind of supernatural alternative to actually showing human empathy, like she does a lot of the time in The Next Generation. Instead, in this version of the character, she uses both, so that she actually fits naturally into the show's themes of empathy, compassion, understanding, etc., instead of kind of pushing against them by making her into this kind of weird, supernatural, stiff kind of figure. For example, looking at Picard's face and making knowing comments about what he may or may not be going through, rather than making these stiff, supernatural pronouncements using her crudely pedantic kind of psychic skills that she had in early The Next Generation, which really made her seem very, very unempathic and really a big put off, a big turn off, a big whatever word you want to use. And just to reiterate, it's not like this is a sudden change that only came out in Picard, because the character does work very well when she appears in Voyager and in the movie Generations, for example. But the character is just so meaningful and compelling in this episode that, for me, it just finally manages to completely overturn my distaste for the character from all those cringeworthy scenes in early Next Generation. It's an interesting canon tidbit that Deanna can't sense Soji, because if I remember right, she could sense it when Moriarty was coming to consciousness in The Next Generation. I don't have a quote on that, but that's what I remember. I guess this is just one of those slightly inconsistent areas within Star Trek, which we can definitely forgive. We learned near the end of this season of Picard, we learned that synths can do mind melds, which theoretically is an aspect of Vulcan telepathy. I think it would have been a quite viable option for Troy in this episode to have gotten a reading, reading on Soji. Or better yet, they could have had some kind of abnormal halfway there, like I could read her, but something's really funny, but that's just my opinion. The discussion about trust and doubt in this episode is absolutely superb. It seems to be the core of the episode, and I think one of the most memorable and compelling psychological elements of the entire season, and definitely of the series. The whole extended exploration of the concepts of recovering from betrayal and abuse in heavily traumatic, manipulative kinds of contexts, and the whole doubting reality or your perception of reality, losing your ability to feel alive in the most basic way. It's just so true to life, and the acting and the presentation of this are just so superb. In both the A plot and the B plot, they juxtapose the depression / stress / trauma / anxiety, this amalgam. They juxtapose that against these contexts of warmth and safety, surrounded by people who care about you, and environments that just breathe the words home and happy and belonging. Experiencing darkness, emptiness, and agony in the face of pleasures and happy, pleasant, normal life contexts. Particularly think about Soji going to bed, the bunk bed, with Kestra dangling from the top bunk, talking her ear off. Or think about Jurati eating cake while holding back the truth and telling no one what's tormenting her. Soji is cognitively aware of the positive, warm, happy environmental cues all around her, but inside she's empty. And Kestra's bubbly, happy smile and the home-like associations of the bedroom and the pleasant, quiet evening and the nice little, woodsy area, these things don't sink into Soji's reality because she's not able to live in that reality. She's instead living far away in a seared reality that is only sharp edges and hard serrated surfaces with ground that shatters under your feet. And over time, she just kind of gingerly walks through this unreal, numb world of joys she can't feel. And at every point, we just long for some little indication that there's some room inside her for just a little echo of that joy to seep into her. just a little drop of that comfort and peace and connectedness to seep into just the tiniest corner of her strangled heart. Part of why it makes so much sense. And really, it's enough to make a softie like me start to cry when Kestra tells Soji, at least she's got Picard, at least you got Picard. And Soji says, I don't have Picard. But you could, and you can just tell that when you watch Soji laying there, you can just tell that she's so deeply wishing that that could be true. But knowing, with all those sickening inner churnings inside her, she's just knowing that that's not reality. That scene is definitely a wow. I mean, the whole episode is just one great big wow for me. Now, as far as criticisms go, I do agree with those who say it does look a little corny for her to do her data head tilt just so Riker can see it. Yeah, we'll pretend we didn't see that. To be honest, actually, I didn't even notice that the first time. I had to hear it commented on a podcast before I noticed it. But I think the way Riker, throws his guess to Picard, he's like, let me tell you, what's really going on. You don't have to confirm. And I think the way Riker says it, it's almost, his tone is insignificant enough. It's kind of like a playful stab in the dark more than anything. I think we can just forget about the visible head tilt and pretend he said, I would recognize, fill in the blank, her skin tone. I don't know, to me, it's easy enough to overlook because really, I mean, in the story, there's no connection between the mannerisms or personality of Soji and those of Data. Soji and Data are about as opposite as any two people in terms of mannerisms or personality. They're about as opposite as any two people could be. But I think Riker could still definitely make the guess as a stab in the dark because of other reasons, such as the fact that Picard is really into this. He's really motivated. There's this young girl. What would the relationship be between Picard, who doesn't have a daughter, doesn't have a granddaughter, etc.? He could make a stab in the dark. The kind of stab in the dark that he could have been wrong, but he happened to be right, that kind of thing. But anyway, this video is way too long. Let me just wrap things up. So the episode ends with Jurati taking some poison into a hypo to break that chemical tracker. Meaning, she just faced her trauma head on. And she broke through that kind of trauma-conditioned brainwashing. And she broke through it, giving herself that hypo, doing it knowing that the physiological consequences of whatever's going to happen when she injects herself with this stuff it's going to be horrific, and she could very well die screaming. If you inject some kind of, I forget what they called it, but the impression I got was that it's like she's injecting herself with aluminum or something, something absurd like that. That's like, you're going to kill yourself, and then she starts foaming at the mouth, Really powerful moment, because she's got this trauma conditioning where she feels that she can't go against O, because O has the power associated with all those terrifying images. But she also realizes over time, when she does let herself actually think about things, she's able to kind of get past some of those mental blocks. Little bits of her normal common sense start to come through, and she realizes what's going on. So it's kind of like she's got two options that are unacceptable, and there's terror on both sides. The one side of her just keeping on doing what she's doing, the other side of her trying to resist terrifying power. And not only is she going against O and all the terror that goes with that, she's injecting some kind of toxic chemical into her body. And probably it's only I'm guessing that she believes, but she doesn't really know that it would actually kill the tracker. Anyway, so she does that, and then the La Serena goes to pick up Picard and Soji from Nepenthe. They beam up, and then our happy little family crew all get back on the road again, as it were. But yeah, for my money, this episode is the best and most memorable and impactful episode of the series by far. Not because it's any kind of standalone wonder, but because of how it builds on everything that was building toward this point. Seems to me to be the dynamic core and the powerful centerpiece of the season. Next episode in my series, I'll be discussing episode 8, Broken Pieces, which actually at this point, I don't remember clearly. Obviously, the 7 of 9 role has been hinted at in this episode, so I'll be looking forward to seeing that unfold. But yeah, sure there'll be a lot of interesting things to draw out and talk about there. So see you then.